Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. We're just going to wait for some more folks to start logging on, maybe right at 12:30 or a little bit after, but so grateful, everyone, for tuning in, and we're going to learn a lot today.
Or you can let me know when you.
We can go ahead and get started.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to give folks a few more seconds here to get in. Happy New Year.
Go ahead and get started. We have about 20 attendees in the webinar
Okay,
so far.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us, and Happy New Year. I'm Kendra Lewis, Executive Director of the Sacramento Housing Alliance, and we're excited to get our new year kicked off with the Roadshow. Today, we have a stellar staff, HCD staff, that's going to bring to you the Housing Accountability and Enforcement Unit Roadshow. You'll learn about how they hold jurisdictions accountable for their housing element commitments and other state law. Joining us today is David Zisler, Melinda Coy, and Shannon West. We were scheduled for about an hour for today's presentation, and we will let the panelists present initially, and then Adro will drive the Q&A. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll wrap it up after that. So again, thank you. We're excited to kind of get our year started with this, given that last year we spent so much time in our region on the housing element. So David, will you, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure, yeah.
Great. Thank you.
I'm going to share my screen, hopefully get that right. How's that look? We good? Great. I'll start just thanks for the initial introductions. Just I think Shannon, Melinda, and I can just say just a couple quick things about ourselves. I am David Zisser. I'm the Assistant Deputy Director for Local Government Relations and Accountability at HCD. I oversee our accountability work and housing element work and program planning grants and incentives. I am new to HCD, so you will see that Melinda, who has been here for a very long time, will handle most of this presentation, and Shannon as well has also been there for a while. I about 2 months into the job. I think some of you know, before I came to HCD, I was the Associate Director at Housing California for a few years. Before that was civil rights and community lawyer at a couple organizations, including Public Advocates down in the Bay Area. And I'm very glad to be at HCD. I'm enjoying the work and the collaboration involved, which we'll talk about. And with that, I will let Shannon, you want to go next? Introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Shannon West. At HCD, I'm the Housing Accountability Unit Chief. In this role, relatively short amount of time, but with HCD for about 3 years. I come from a background that actually started in the private sector, working on architecture and planning. From a developer point of view, I've also worked in local government as a municipal planner, worked at GoBiz, the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, doing permit streamlining for all industries, not just housing. But I bring all of that experience to HCD, and we are just really excited to bolster the work that we've already been doing, and I think embark on some new ones. So happy to be here. Thanks so much. Popcorn to you, Melinda.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melinda Coy. I am a Senior Housing Accountability Manager here at HCD. I've been with the department and specifically with the Housing Policy Division since 2005. So I've been here for quite a bit of time, mostly focused on housing elements during my tenure here at HCD. So I'm very deep-rooted background in all of the laws as well as housing elements, and really excited to really dive into this work. As one of my colleagues used to say, it's far different from when we used to have to write very strongly worded letters, right? And so now we actually have some enforcement and some teeth that we can utilize and tools to utilize to make sure that jurisdictions are being held to account and make sure that they are following state law and that they're actually implementing their housing element, right? This thing that I've been working on. So super excited. Can't wait to hear from you all today. So maybe David, we want to get into the presentation and then go forward.
Yeah, and I'll kick us off. Before we jump in, just want to make a real strong point of thanking Kendra Edgiro, as well as Kathy Cresswell, for inviting and coordinating and getting this together. I'm a big fan of SHA and appreciate the opportunity to talk with y'all. So thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, let's dive in. Just a quick overview of what we'll be covering. We'll do an overview of our accountability and enforcement work, who we think of as our team, the authorities that we have, briefly about our process for accountability and enforcement, some background and overview of housing element law as it relates to the accountability work, and then really want to spend some time talking about how we think of collaboration with stakeholders like you all, and leave some time for Q&A and discussion. That's the plan today. So starting with an overview of accountability and enforcement, we sort of think of the A&E work in a few different buckets, primarily really complaint-based and proactive. We get complaints. We'll share the email address that we invite folks to share complaints at. We get complaints about projects that are getting disapproved or delayed, about ordinances that are problematic, et cetera. And we assign those cases out for investigation and pursue cases that way. We're also developing a proactive enforcement path with leadership from Shannon and Melinda, and we'll talk more about that later. We're really excited about it. It presents some real new opportunities to hold jurisdictions accountable for the commitments they're making in their housing elements, and really giving some teeth to housing elements as plans that include policies and programs and commitments that they need to actually implement. We always, well, almost always, pretty much always start with technical assistance. We really do want to collaborate with local jurisdictions. There are a lot of laws. Some of them are fairly complicated, and we want to guide jurisdictions in how to comply with all the laws that are out there that we have purview over, and eventually move on to enforcement. We'll talk a little bit about that process later. We do have some criteria for prioritizing cases that we get, and so we do try to do that when necessary, looking at things like impact, communities that are affected, whether there's some precedential value to the case, things along those lines. And then we'll talk about this more, but we do, and this gets back to the TA piece, we do have what we sort of term a progressive discipline approach that starts with TA and could, if appropriate, move on to a notice of violation, potentially revoking housing element compliance, referring a case to the Attorney General's office for litigation, if that's what it comes to. And again, Melinda will cover some of that. So one of the things that I think is really exciting about this work is the collaboration across different areas of HCD and the administration. This work really is at the intersection of both law and policy. We are housed in the Housing Policy Development Division. Many of you know Megan Kirkby. She is the Deputy Director of that division and my boss. So the Housing Accountability Unit really provides that policy expertise and experience, and we work very, very, very closely with HCD's Legal Affairs Division, or LAD, and a team of lawyers that they have. In fact, they've staffed up a bit to provide that partnership and support to our unit to ramp up the enforcement work. We're also collaborating really closely and chat with almost on a daily basis with the Attorney General's office, specifically their housing strike force that they recently brought together. And so it really is a trifecta between these three entities in state government, and we're excited about that collaboration. This is where I'm going to turn over to Melinda to start talking about the various authorities that we have. We could do a whole few days or weeks on this, so we're going to run through this really fast. And Melinda's got this.
Great, thank you. So just to cover some of the enforcement authorities that we have, obviously a lot of it is rooted first and foremost in housing element law. AB 72, which was put into place in 2017 as part of the 2017 housing package, kicked it off with really the expressed authority for HCD to kind of take a look at housing elements throughout the planning period and ensure that jurisdictions are not taking any actions that are incongruent with what they were promising to do in their housing element, and giving us the express authority to revoke compliance if they do. So a lot of this started in housing element law, making sure that we do have that express authority to continue to look at housing elements throughout the planning period. And that's really, I think, a key piece to what we are doing, and really, shows that our review of housing elements during the beginning of the planning period, which for the Sacramento region, half of the jurisdictions are in compliance, half of the jurisdictions are still working through the process, right? But that's only the beginning of the story. Then there's other laws in which we have what we call enforcement authority over, which is where we provide a lot of technical assistance. But then if we do see that there's been some violation of the law, that we can call that out to the jurisdiction and refer that to the Attorney General's office. So those are those AB 72 authorities. A lot of them are directly, again, connected to housing element law, such as the Housing Accountability Act, density bonus law, no net loss law, and land use discrimination law. For those folks who are not as wonky as I am, each of these laws are land use laws that provide some sort of protections or incentives for development. Housing accountability law specifically protects development, especially affordable housing, from unjustly denial at a local level. Density bonus law gives certain kinds of incentives to developers for providing affordable housing. No net loss law really ensures that there continues to be land capacity in a jurisdiction to accommodate their housing needs throughout the planning period. And land use discrimination law makes sure that the decisions that are made at a local level are not made in a manner that is against fair housing, right? That it's not being discriminatory in those decisions. In between AB 72 and today, other laws have been put in place that gave us additional authority, enforcement authority. So that is our accessory dwelling unit work. We have the enforcement authority over ordinances. So we've been reviewing every single ordinance jurisdictions adopt for compliance with ADU law. Surplus Lands Act and noticing requirements. We've been reviewing those as well. And then, of course, affordable housing preservation noticing law. Now, HCD has had a role in preservation noticing law for years, but most recently, we've gotten enforcement authority and the ability to refer to the Attorney General should there be some sort of violation in that noticing law. It's extremely important law. Really protects tenants and making sure that they have adequate notice if their rents are going to increase because the loss of subsidy. Most recently, the legislature gave us additional authority, which is this AB 215 authority that you see here, right? And most of these laws we have already been in this space for, either because we're providing technical assistance or because we're required to do guidelines in the, for example, SB 35, the streamlined ministerial permit processes. Affirmatively furthering fair housing, we already had a role in that in terms of housing elements. This kind of makes sure that other land use processes are covered. So this is a kind of a new area for the enforcement piece. Like I said, we've been in the kind of technical assistance piece. Why you see the different colors here, there's the pieces that are highlighted in red. That is just to give you some sense of to date, kind of the areas in which we have gotten the most most requests about, right? The most requests for technical assistance or areas where we've intervened, asked to intervene the most. Just to give you a sense of where we've been in the past couple of years. Next slide, please.
So now we're gonna have a pop quiz. We expect everyone to know everything about all these laws. Just kidding. Keep going.
It's the "Are you as wonky as me" test. So this is on our website, and we do have quite a bit of information on our website. So I really encourage you to go there if you have questions. But this just gives you a sense of our process and that progressive discipline approach that David was talking about. So we receive complaints. And so we review those, right? So we always, when we receive inquiries, we contact the person who is inquiring as well as the local government. And we do our due diligence to kind of make sure that we fully understand what the situation is, right? And then we seek to provide technical assistance wherever available, right? So a lot of times what we're dealing with is jurisdictions that are not that sophisticated. They may not know all of the nuances and ins and outs that, fail the "Are you wonky as Melinda" test. And so we provide a lot of technical assistance to local governments to help them in their decision making, right? That is a real key piece. A good example, actually very timely example, is that we just recently sent the city of Cloverdale a letter reminding them of their responsibilities under the Housing Accountability Act and the Housing Element Law in relationship to a 100% affordable housing project that they were considering. As a result, they just voted, I think, last night to approve that project. So we count that as a win. It's at the Planning Commission level, so it can always be appealed, but that is kind of gives you a sense of something that we do. And then from there, we kind of take it down to the next kind of levels. So we kind of are divided into two paths, right? Our Housing Element Authority, and then like all of our other statutory areas. Our Housing Element Authority, there we're looking at, if there's a potential violation, did they do an inaction or action that violates the housing element law? Do we need to pull their compliance, right? And kind of continue down. And then finally, if they are out of compliance and violating the law, do we need to refer to the Attorney General? In fact, our first case out of the gate was with the city of Huntington Beach because of their housing element. On the other side, we have the other statutory areas. So there we might start with a notice of potential violation. Again, this is warning the city that what they have done or what they may be considering doing may potentially violate the law, and then a notice of violation, and then of course, then referral to the Attorney General's office and our partners there. So that just kind of gives you of that a sense of kind of how we operate in this space. So some results, initial results. So far, we have produced over about 250 pieces of technical assistance. Most of those are in letter forms, but there's actually quite a body of work that we've done that's not represented in that in terms of phone calls. Sometimes a phone call will solve a problem, right? Just get on the phone and meet with the city. And they're like, okay, thank you, and then it's done. Or email or something like that, more informal technical assistance. We've helped several projects get through the planning process to get to production. We've been really diligent because the 6 cycle housing elements are just now coming online. We've been really diligent to make sure that the programs and actions that cities are promising to do in their housing elements have metrics that we can then measure against and be able to implement. And then providing a lot of education and help to local governments is something that we've been really doing in terms of technical assistance memos, as well as, again, those statutory interpretation and technical assistance requests. We've been very much building our relationships and connections with the Attorney General's office, and then also with other groups, right, that are really working in this space. And like I said, we won our first case in Huntington Beach, which was really exciting. So I'm just going to talk very, very briefly about housing element law. Most of you probably are more aware of this. Again, the SACOG region or the Sacramento region is about halfway through the number of housing elements that are in compliance. They were due May 15th. So we're coming up on 1 year from their due date. Most of them are in some sort of process there. So we're kind of now starting to transition in the Sacramento region into implementation. But just in case, housing element law basically sets the table for development to occur. It's the planning document that really outlines how a jurisdiction is going to accommodate their housing need through the shorter 8-year time period, what we call a planning period. And then it lays the foundation for other housing element activities or housing activities, local government types of funding rely on housing elements. Of course, there's intersections preservation work, our ADU work, our accountability enforcement work. And just, again, it lays the foundation for getting housing built. And it must be updated every 8 years. So for most of the Sacramento region, like I said, the due date for the housing elements was May 15th of last year. Most of them are in some sort of progress in terms of getting to compliance. So just to give you a sense of where we're at, right now we're in the middle of an incredibly large spike, right? So just this last year, not only did we have the Sacramento area region that we are looking at, but we also have the entirety of the San Diego region and the Southern California Association of Governments. So it's about, just in this last year, there's about 256 jurisdictions we're working on with in terms of getting their housing elements in compliance. It is a large load, and our reviewers are working very, very hard to do so, but it is a gigantic lift. The second spike that we're going to see is starting probably this year, as we're going to see the Association of Bay Area Governments. They're going to start bringing in their housing elements and their drafts, and we're going to be reviewing that. So we're in a crunch time, and our staff is very diligently trying to be good stewards of this law. Moving on. So there's some consequences built into the statute for non-compliance. It's really kind of important here. And is, again, that first step in our accountability and enforcement work. First, if a housing element is not in compliance, there are some legal ramifications. Either third parties or the AG's office, or us through the AG's office, can sue the jurisdiction because of their in compliance with housing element law. There are some fines and penalties that could happen if that occurs. And then, of course, there's some connections to Housing Accountability Act requirements where there are certain particular findings that jurisdictions have to make in order to deny an affordable housing project. Two of those findings that they could make have housing element compliance requirements, so they would not be able to make those findings. And then finally, there's ineligibility or delay in receiving state funds, right? There's certain funding that's really tied to housing elements, either as a threshold component, meaning you need to have compliance to get those funds, or as a point scoring criteria. So there's some real key important consequences if a jurisdiction remains out of compliance with state housing law. One thing I want to say, and leading into kind of what we're talking about, the proactive piece, is that we're viewing housing elements very differently because we have this tool, right? So housing elements in our mind is no longer kind of a paper exercise where folks are just trying to do their best in the planning, but it's a contract with the state and for their housing commitments for every 8 years. So we are planning on holding those jurisdictions to account for those commitments that they're making in their housing elements. The next slide, please. To that end, we are stepping up our proactive enforcement game. So there's a couple things that I want to highlight here. We are still in the planning stages and really kind of working through. So we welcome your ideas as well. But some of the initial ideas is really bridging that work we're doing on the housing element side and the review side with the enforcement and the implementation side. So making sure that we're tracking and monitoring key program commitments and timeframes, and then inquiring with jurisdictions on their success in implementing those, and then maybe potentially removing compliance if they're not implementing those housing element commitments. Monitoring certain site inventory strategies like accessory dwelling unit production, right? So a lot of jurisdictions are really relying very heavily on potential ADUs. And so we want to monitor that production to make sure it's keeping pace with what they assumed in the housing element. We are investing in technology to help better facilitate tracking. Right now, we've got some old school Excel sheets that we're using, but we are very, very fortunate that we've gotten approval to help us have better technology to really be able to facilitate this work, which will only make it more streamlined and then more effective. And then one of the things that we're kind of really noodling on is how do we use the tools that we already have, like the annual progress and data we already have, like the annual progress report information, to basically better help inform those proactive enforcement activities and be able to identify jurisdictions that are falling behind on meeting their housing goals and what that means. So those are some of the ideas in the proactive realm. All right, back to you, David.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Melinda. As always, a really good rundown. A lot more information behind all of that. So now, many of you already probably knew some of that. Maybe for some it's new. So, armed with this information, what can it look like to collaborate with HCD on accountability enforcement? These are just a few things. One, we encourage folks to really engage in the housing element process, as it says here, both at the local and state level. So that means, engaging in the public participation process, sending comments to the local jurisdiction, really trying to shape the housing element even before it gets to us. And then once it does get to us, sharing comments with us that we can incorporate into our review of those housing elements. We do look at all public comments and consider them. We have to, and we want to. So we encourage you to engage with us that way as well. If there's one takeaway I want folks to walk away from it's this one, which is please send us complaints or concerns about potential violations that you're seeing in your communities by the local jurisdictions. You don't have to know exactly which law it violates. Obviously, the more information, the better. But we can and do that assessment. If it's housing element related, it should go to housingelements@hcd.ca.gov. For violations of any number of those laws that Melinda outlined, you can email compliancereview@hcd.ca.gov. Those will get assigned out and, if appropriate, investigated. We, for folks who are really plugged into housing development, especially affordable housing development, like many of you are, you all have your ears to the ground, your finger to the pulse, choose your cliche. We would love to get the benefit of that. We really rely on community partners' input into knowing what's going on, and whether it's about a specific project, about an ordinance, or something else. And lastly, please feel free to invite us to speak in other venues. Conferences are one example. Webinars like this are another. We welcome that opportunity. We really want to get the word out. We're ready, I guess, at this point to do some Q&A. Maybe a few questions from us as food for thought that we welcome your input on. Questions you have about our process. Any trends and patterns that you're observing in your communities about housing approvals or potential violations, things that are not promoting housing, and especially affordable housing development. And then, you know, any hopes that you have for our housing accountability work that we're doing. We're you know, a lot of this is new, so it creates a really exciting opportunity to kind of shape this. And we've got a lot of things already in place, but there's room to sort of grow this and shape it more. And we're glad to get your thoughts about that. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, David, Melinda, and Shannon. That was all really, really helpful information. One of the things we want to just start off with asking you is, so how will this new Housing Accountability Unit interact with some of the current HCD programs, and how has that been working so far?
You're a little hard to hear, Jero, but
sorry.
I think I got. Oh, Kendra just said that too. I think the question was, how will the HAU interact with other HCD programs, and I assume like other teams as well, is kind of what you're getting at.
Yeah.
I don't know, Melinda or Shannon, if one of you wants to start. I can also.
Well, I can say that right now we are working very much involved with our data and research team, who have been working with the Surplus Lands Act, as well as our preservation team and our ADU team, right? Those are all part and nestled into our enforcement authority. And so we're doing a lot of cross collaboration there. Obviously, our housing element work is a primary function of both this work as well as across our division as well. I'm not sure kind of like if there's other programs that is where we're kind of coordinating on, but it is work across the entire division but focused in our land use unit.
Yeah, I'll mention a couple other things. We already mentioned, obviously, our close collaboration with the Legal Affairs Division, which is part of HCD. There's also a research and innovation, or data and innovation, I think. Data and innovation unit that we collaborate with really closely, especially around public lands issues. The Surplus Land Act enforcement currently lives there. It may migrate over to our Housing Accountability Unit, but regardless, there will continue to be collaboration there. We also collaborate with our Fair Housing Unit. It's run by Tyrone Buckley, whom many of you know. They are the lead on, if I may, my colleagues here can correct me if I get any of this wrong, but on RENA and AFFH, among other things. So there's a lot of like co-leading and collaboration there. And I also want to mention the legislative division, which is run by Pedro Galvao, whom I know many of you know as well. I understand that there'll be even more collaboration coming up as we get bill proposals that need analysis from our division in coordination with Pledge division.
I mean, and the other places where we do kind of coordinate is, of course, with our Division of Financial Assistance. So we talk about those programs that require housing element compliance as a key threshold item. So if through our work we end up having to remove housing element compliance, we work to make sure that those programs are notified and know what the current status is of each jurisdiction in their housing element.
And so we have got a few hands raised, and so we're going to start to take some questions while we have folks. Kathy, you have your hand up.
Great, thank you. And nice to see all of you, and thank you very much for joining. We have been doing a lot of work on housing elements, so we're really excited about, you know, your continuing work. A couple of questions I had was, Melinda, you mentioned, you know, you're going to try to look at the annual reports and figure out how you can use those. And so one of the things we've been interested in is, will you actually review those reports on any kind of regular basis? And in particular, we've been concerned frequently about the accuracy of the data on reporting on affordability. And so if that data isn't accurate, it can skew everything else. So one of the questions I have is what you're thinking about using those and actually reviewing the data in them.
So as you're aware, as folks might be aware, it is self-reported data, right? And so all of the information that we have really does have that caveat. We currently don't have the capacity to review each of those APRs individually for accuracy. We rely on that self-reported data. Now, that being said, if there is an issue, right, that somebody sees and it brings to our attention that issue, then that gives us an opportunity to then reach out to the jurisdiction to verify accuracy at that point in time. So it's the best data we have with the resources that we have and the authorities that we have. But we are, you know, like I said, if you do see something, let us know, and we utilize that to reach out to the jurisdiction to kind of verify or figure out what was going on.
Okay, and then I just had another, again, our process in working with our local jurisdictions, and then we consulted with and we appreciated HCD's willingness to meet with us. However, we were very keenly aware of HCD's staffing, you know, as you mentioned, Melinda, the, you know, overwhelming number of elements. And so as a result, you know, we frequently, our letters didn't get the amount of time that we think were merited and necessary to ensure the public's comments are being concerned or addressed adequately. And so one of the questions I have is how you, in order to make this process effective, how you resist the pressure, both when it comes to reviewing elements in a timely basis, but then also because of the linkage to programs. So when a jurisdiction says to you, hey, if you don't find us in compliance, we're going to miss this funding. How do you address that? Because from an advocacy perspective, that link to funding is only going to be useful if it's actually getting better outcomes and not just used to expedite the process. So that was a couple of different things, but it's really relevant to what's happening in our region. Oh, sorry.
I'm just saying, who's going to take this one? David, do you want to take a stab, or Shannon, and then
I can hop in. I don't disagree. The thresholds that are in place for funding are there on purpose, and they are only useful if they are actually enforced, right? I have to agree with you, though, that there are probably other folks at HCD who feel less strongly about that fact. Nevertheless, though, our unit is here to make sure that those ties are happening. So yes, you're right. Housing element reviewers and those who are up the chain of review probably are feeling quite a bit of pressure to expedite reviews. And I think that that is happening to the extent feasible, but expediting should not be removing quality control, right? When I hear the word expedite, I just hear review this quickly, which unfortunately right now is really difficult for us to commit to in the first place. But I want to make it very clear that when I hear expedite, I do not think that means get to yes as quickly as we can. It really just means HCD perform your evaluation as quickly as you can. And to maintain the integrity of those thresholds for funding is very important. But David, it looked like you had something to add there.
Just a high level, I mean, you know, first of all, it's very, very clear to me that our reviews are very thorough, very diligent. There's multiple levels of review. and experienced reviewers like Melinda and Paul McDougall and others, take a look at all of them after initial reviews. I think you can sort of see in our numbers how willing we are to keep our expectations about what compliance looks like pretty high. Our non-compliance level is high right now. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the vast majority are non-compliant right now because they're just not meeting the requirements. We have pretty clear, very clear encouragement from the administration to lean into the accountability and enforcement role that we play and to really be brave in the space. So we're not being told to go easy on jurisdictions. We're being told to enforce the law and the requirements of the law, and that's really what we're doing. I think when you combine the sort of pro-housing designation with the eligibility for funding that housing element compliance comes with, combined with the creation of the Housing Accountability Unit, combined with these new authorities that we have under AB 215, but also previously under AB 72, there's a consistent theme here, and these things work together, right? And so the theme being, we need more housing production. There are both carrots and sticks to make that happen, and we're leaning into all of it. So I think that's important to share. It's my perspective. And not to say that everything works perfectly, and it's a reason that advocates need to stay involved. But the staff is doing a pretty tremendous job.
Thank you. I do think staff's doing a great job, but it is there's pressures that can have an influence on
Absolutely.
the effectiveness that we remain concerned about. But thank you.
And I think just the takeaway there though is that you're absolutely right. There's pressures directly on reviewers, on up to Melinda, Shannon, and myself, and Megan, and even further up. Again, I think what's become clear to us is that we have the support of the administration to sort of resist that pressure. Say, we have a job to do. It's not going to be popular with everyone, and we're all prepared, for that backlash sometimes. And the folks high up at HCD and in the administration have our backs.
And so moving on to some of our questions, try and get as many of them answered as we can. So we have a question from an attendee. So with the passage of AB 1398, which changes the penalties associated with late housing element adoption, is there a date that jurisdictions must have their housing elements certified?
So 1398 does two things, right? One is that it says that jurisdictions must have a housing element in compliance within 120 days from their due date of their housing element. And if not, then, and this law starts this year as Jan 1, 2022, right? And if not, then there's some penalties. And there's kind of two different tracks. The first penalty is we can still find you in compliance, but you would only have up to the 1 year from the date of your due date of your housing element to get into to do any kind of rezones that are necessary. If a jurisdiction is out of compliance after 1 year from their due date, we cannot find them in compliance until they do their rezones, if they have a rezone program. So those are the two pieces of 1398 that are kind of the consequences that are kind of put into place right now.
So our next question, and so are there sites identified in the housing element to satisfy the low/moderate housing needs to have reasonable expectations of development within the 8-year planning period? And how is reasonable defined? And so it's kind of that.
Yeah, I'm reading. So thanks for that, Reed. It's good to see you. I worked with Reed when he was back in Rancho Cordova for housing elements, like way back when. So the statute lays out what's required in terms of being able to identify specific land that could accommodate the low and the very low. And then separately, there's some additional now requirements for, not for the SACOG region, but for jurisdictions that are due after January 1 of this year, related to the moderate. So those requirements include making sure that there's sufficient density in place to be able to facilitate the economies of scale necessary to do affordable housing. And as well as some site requirements, how big the site is, how little the site is, et cetera. And then, of course, there's the other requirements in housing element law. It's quite lengthy in terms of how do you demonstrate the viability of a site to be able to accommodate housing, right? So what the inventory is trying to do is to say these sites have development opportunity within the planning period, right? And we have enough sites that have development opportunity within the planning period to accommodate our arena. And that is within that 8-year time period, right? So, there might be a situation where there might be sites like, for example, large specific plans, right? Large amounts of land that will potentially be developed, but may not happen within this next 8 years, right? So that would not be considered as appropriate. But so that, I hope that answers your question. But essentially is the sites inventory is there to identify what development opportunities are available for development to accommodate the need.
Thank you. So our next question is, how is HCD enforcing or responding with respect to the draft housing elements that incorporate unrealistic housing sites or sites with unrealistic capacity or assumptions of development timelines and subparcels that are not realistic to develop? How is HCD responding?
I think that's probably another question for me, but then I want to ask you all a question, right? So again, I think I answered it for the most part in the last statement I had, but essentially we follow what the statute is. If you see a site that you think is unrealistic and doesn't really have development potential within that 8-year time period, please let us know. Right, we really highly rely on our local partners to be able to ground truth things, right? We see a housing element site and they say, come, and the jurisdiction says it has opportunity, but it may not. One thing I do want to point out is that there are two pieces to the housing element analysis, right? There is the analysis on the actual site on whether or not that site can accommodate new development, but then there's a program piece, right, that help facilitate that to occur. So a site might be marginal on the analysis side, but then coupled with programs that really facilitate and encourage housing development to happen on that site, it might actually improve its chances to get developed within the planning period. So that's kind of the way that and the statute lays out exactly how to do capacity assumptions. It's pretty formulaic there, but I would, we do have a lot of technical assistance on our website in terms of these requirements. I don't want to get really deep in the weeds, but I do want to kind of, maybe ask about how we can partner with this group and with you all in our accountability enforcement work. Is there things that we can maybe, do together, or do you have any ideas for us that to be able to better partner in this new growth that we're working on? Oops.
Okay, there you are. And so definitely want to open it up if anyone has additional feedback. But one of the things we've been doing at the Sacramento Housing Alliance is with our partners at Legal Services of Northern California and the Public Interest Law Project throughout the housing element draft and adoption period within the SACOG region. We've been hosting, we have a collaborative meeting that we regularly meet, sometimes weekly and bi-weekly, to try and kind of get together all of our comments to the different jurisdictions. And many of them used and adopted in the drafts in those jurisdictions. But as we gather together all of our comments and our advice about the elements, just having like a clear line of communication to how we can make sure that certain issues that we see are addressed. Because a lot of times our comments, they hold more weight when we have HCD support with who is leading on accountability and enforcement. And so just kind of making sure those lines of communication are clear, and we continue to have y'all support. Yeah, and so I know we had those emails that were listed about, whenever there's something that we need to address, to make that contact. And I don't know if you all have like a kind of like a timeline to kind of get back when people have issues that they want HCD to respond to in their local elements, or have an idea of how communication will go back and forth with advocates.
I was going to say, Shannon or David, you guys want to hop in here?
Sure. I mean, I think Melinda and Shannon will have better context about sort of how this has happened in the past, but I'll just say, maybe somewhat try to be as diplomatic as possible. But I think one reason I'm excited about being in this role is that I have a lot of previous relationships with groups like SHA and affordable housing developers, et cetera. And, the door is open. We're glad, if you all reach out and want to chat, you're always going to hear back. And if there's stuff that you want to convey to us, we'll make sure it gets to the team and to the people who are involved in the specific reviews of the relevant housing elements, for example. We do a lot of connecting of dots, right? So if we get a complaint about one jurisdiction that's unrelated to housing elements, we'll always kind of cross-reference across the team to see, what's going on with that jurisdiction on other issues. So we'll make sure the right people, get that information. So, it's kind of an open door policy. We're excited about this kind of collaboration and looking for those opportunities. That's why Melinda was asking the question. So, yeah. I don't know if Shannon, you want to add anything?
No, I think that's well said.
Thank you. We have a few more questions, Kathy.
Well, in response to your request, Melinda, so we're in the middle of our process in the housing elements, and we are setting up a system to enable us to do the kind of monitoring that will hopefully reinforce the work that you're doing. So we're working on that. But I also wonder whether it would be possible to set up a standing bi-monthly or whatever meeting so that we can kind of share information about what we're seeing. I know when we were starting our housing element process, we were really hoping to have some meetings with the reviewers who were assigned to our region, which we think is a great practice, and we appreciated it. We weren't able to do it because things were moving quickly, but that sort of practice of helping reviewers and the people who are working in your units learn more about the things that are actually happening on the ground and have those kind of relationships and contacts, I think will enable us to really support the work that you're trying to do and also help us make sure that we're seeing the outcomes on the ground that we're all hoping for, that make living conditions better for folks. So is that something you all would entertain?
I think the short answer is yes. I mean, again, just to be kind of trite, you all very much have, your ears to the ground here. I mean, that's how we're going to learn about what's going on. I think SHA in particular, one thing that I'll just mention is that I know that some stakeholders don't necessarily feel comfortable getting on the record with a complaint. So there may be some hesitation from some developers who want to maintain good relationships, for example, with local jurisdictions. I hope that this is a place where SHA can be a bit of an intermediary and maybe, and play that role that you guys play so well as the advocacy voice for affordable housing development. So if you can kind of help be the clearinghouse and share some of that with us in a consistent space, I think we'd welcome that.
Yeah, I think that, again, I think it would be productive both for us, but I think as well for your new unit. And we want to see you guys be successful because your success means things are changing on the ground and people have more real opportunities. So that would be great. So we'll follow up. We'll follow up with y'all.
Please do.
So we're heading just a minute before 1:30. Kendra is going to close us out.
I think you said Kendra's going to close us out.
Yes. Sorry, my audio is.
Yeah, when you lean in, it's great. So thank you to our panelists, Melinda. Excuse my voice; it's just terrible. David and Shannon and Adro and. Just, for pulling this together, David, in your position, reaching out, that's the first step when it comes to, this kind of work in the partnership. So thank you. We all have a lot of work to do, doing it in a pandemic under the housing crisis. It's a heavy lift. So I really thank you all for taking the time. And for really being very serious about this work in California and these jurisdictions, and then working with organizations like ours to help better our region, and then for us to continue to collaborate at the statewide level with our partners all throughout. So thank you. Thank everybody. This is just the beginning of this. We're going to really continue this work in depth for the year around the housing element, since we spent so much time, and we want our jurisdictions to have the technical information, the education, the outreach education, and we want them to be successful because at the end of the day, that's what we're all here for, is to learn and do better. So thank everyone on behalf of our board of directors and members, SHA, we thank you. We will put in the chat, if you're not a member of our organization, we are wonderful, small and mighty. Please join us, become a member. And this is the kind of thing that members really get and our community gets access to. This expertise, this information, and for us to work together for bigger ideas and to work together better to ensure that people have an affordable, safe home and live in a neighborhood that they love and feel they have a voice in. So thank you. We're going to work on getting this posted on our YouTube. We're a work in progress, but we hope to get this out, so to share it out. And then we will continue to inform you about what the great work this unit is doing. And hopefully you won't be on the other side of them. Thank you. Again, have a great rest of the week. Happy New Year. We look forward to working with you all this year to make change in housing.
Thanks again.
Thank you. we still recording?